Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has spent Wednesday visiting troops on the front line in the eastern Donetsk region. The unannounced visit was his first there since December. It was meant as a morale boost for troops fighting to retain control of Bakhmut, which has seen months of Russian bombardment.
Boosting the morale of soldiers fighting the fiercest of Ukraine's battles so far. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's office released this footage of him handing out medals. It's said to have been taken close to the front lines near the city of Bakhmut.
I have the honor to be here today, in the east of our state, in the Donbas, and to reward our heroes, to thank you, and to shake hands. Thank you for protecting the state, sovereignty, and the east of Ukraine.
The city of Bakhmut has seen the bloodiest battles, with Russia attempting to encircle Ukrainian troops there for weeks. The devastated city has become a symbol of Ukraine's resistance. And with Russia advancing on the battlefield, Zelenskyy's tribute to the soldiers comes at a critical time. The Ukrainian president also visited a military hospital, praising medical teams for their work.
I want to thank you for your professionalism and your work. Until we win, we need to save the lives of many people who are defending our country. You are defending it on your front.
Zelenskyy's visit near the front lines comes just days after Russian President Vladimir Putin took his first ever trip to the eastern Donbas region, visiting his troops in Russian-occupied Mariupol.
Well, straight to the Ukrainian capital then, where we find DW correspondent Nick Connelly. Welcome, Nick. This is President Zelenskyy's second visit to the Bakhmut region. Why is he taking such a risk?
I think all through this war, Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been all about showing his willingness to take risks, to get closer to the action. I was in Kherson when the Ukrainian army came back in the autumn, and he was there even though there was kind of artillery fire very close. It's all about the kind of implicit contrast with Vladimir Putin, who, as we all remember, likes to meet people at the end of a very long table, is rumoured to spend a lot of time in a bunker and move around Russia in a special armoured train. So I think there's that contrast, especially to Putin's recent visit to Mariupol there, which all happened at night with very little interaction with people on the ground. And I think it is also definitely about morale. I mean, Bakhmut is the centre of action on the front line now. Huge losses, although we don't have any real kind of data that would talk about the actual numbers, but certainly lots of people dying there in a city that probably at some point will have to be abandoned. But it's about, convincing the troops on the ground to keep on going and to explaining to them why it's worth risking their lives for a city that might, in the near future be abandoned. So that was what this was all about, and it's certainly something that goes down very well with the people here in Ukraine.
Now, this war, this invasion has been going on for longer than a year now. Russia clearly expected it just to last weeks. And now we have the NATO Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, who's reported to be warning Ukraine's allies that they should prepare for an extended war, a war of attrition. Is Ukraine prepared for that?
I think if you talk to people here in Kyiv and across the country, people say, yes, we hope that the counteroffensive in the spring now will bring things to an end, but actually most people in their kind of heart of hearts are prepared for something longer, are expecting this to be something that drags on. In terms of the losses, in terms of Ukraine's willingness to sacrifice people on the front lines, we have the bigger question of exactly how many people have lost their lives already. The numbers just aren't there. It's all basically censored. That's not something that the authorities here are going to reveal during wartime. Last summer we had the top general in the army talking about under 10,000 casualties. Now, more recently, we've had a top security official saying under 100,000, whereas we've had Western, fairly authoritative speakers talking about certainly more than 100,000 deaths on the Ukrainian side. So no real understanding of where these numbers are, but there definitely is an understanding among lots of Ukrainians that if they don't carry on now, that this is going to drag on, that Russia, even if it takes a break, maybe freezes this contrast, this conflict, that they would then have another go in the future, and maybe that would claim even more lives.
Understood. Thank you for that, Nick. Nick Connelly in Kyiv.
I'm very pleased to welcome Ihor Zhaovkva. He's President Zelensky's top foreign policy advisor and the deputy head of the president's office. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW today. As we've just heard, we have a landmark moment today with the EU greenlighting a joint plan to supply your country with 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition. How helpful do you think this will be for Ukraine's war effort?
Yeah, that's a really important initiative, which was initiated by Prime Minister of Estonia. We're thankful to her personally and to the government and to the countries of the EU who already supported this initiative. The artillery rounds, the ammunition, is what is badly needed now in order to start the counteroffensive on the ground. You remember we successfully had the counteroffensive in several territories in the end of previous year. So this year we have to start it, but in order to start it, we need enough artillery shells, enough armored vehicles and tanks, and that will provide our success.
When you talk about a counteroffensive, we've heard the commander of Ukraine's ground forces saying today that his army would very soon take advantage of Russian fatigue in Bakhmut. Is that where you were referring to a Ukrainian counteroffensive?
No, we definitely will not reveal where we will start the counteroffensive. But if you ask me about the Bakhmut area is important for Ukraine because this is our territory, this is our land, and we will not, give away any single inch of Ukrainian territory. But definitely, let's not ease the task of the aggressor, and let's not, reveal the plans of Ukrainian armed forces.
So, where is that ammunition then most badly needed in Ukraine?
Well, we need ammunition badly on all the territories. I mean, you even heard officially Secretary General of NATO, he told about the number of artillery shells we use on a daily basis. But Russia uses like 5 or 10 times more. We want and we have to defend now. So now we're defending, like it is in the Bakhmut, but yes, we need the artillery shells in order to start the counteroffensive in many areas which are not yet liberated.
So we have this promise from the EU, but yet all of your Western partners' pledges, whether it's tanks or ammunition or other equipment, they do seem to have one thing in common in that the delivery takes a long time. What kind of impact does that have?
That's unfortunately true, and there are many reasons for this. Sometimes the supply chains are quite not that quick. Sometimes it takes bureaucracy. Yes, we really need speed. We really need speed in terms of delivery because we've received many promises. And you remember at the beginning of this open war, there was no talk about artillery system. There was not about Western type of tanks. Now we have all the promises. Now we started the deliveries of the battle tanks. So yes, we need it quickly. We need it by the end of this month and a bigger amount in order to start the counteroffensive.
Okay, so I call for that delivery by the end of this month. I do want to turn to get your view on how deepening ties between Russia and China are going to affect this war. We've seen Putin turning to Beijing, seeking support. Are you worried about increasing Chinese involvement on the Kremlin side, also in the war?
I would not call this visit of Xi Jinping a total success for Putin. Definitely, we might count this as a success for President Xi, because much of the talk was about further development of economic ties between China and Russia, further increasing the supply of Russia energy resources to China, cheap Russia energy resources. So as far as President Xi is concerned, the success is totally of his, while Putin, I think, didn't even achieve half of what he was planning. So we do not have any information about, Chinese delivery of weapons to Russia. We do not have any statements about, union between China and Russia in war against Ukraine. So I think that Chinese leadership and Chinese people are wise enough not to take sides of Russia in this war.
Now, we were expecting that Chinese President Xi Jinping, after returning from that trip to Russia, would call President Zelenskyy on the phone. Are you still expecting that call is going to happen?
I don't have any official information on that, but really my president was telling earlier, and this is still true, that he's ready to talk to President Xi in order to give the view on what is going on in Ukraine.
What kind of communication have you had with the Chinese side, and what do you expect to hear from them?
Well, a foreign minister regularly talks to his colleague, foreign minister of China, Mr. Tim Gan. He talks also to the previous foreign minister, who is now a top advisor in the party, in the ruling party, Mr. Wang Yi. So there's a good diplomatic talk, but definitely the talk between the leaders would be the most reliable source for Chinese authorities to get the position on what is really going on as far as the Russian aggression against Ukraine is concerned.
And I really want to get a sense of Ukraine's position here regarding deepening ties between Russia and China. What would President Zelensky's message be to Xi?
Well, definitely President Zelensky will deliver his message personally to President Xi. I will not concentrate, on lots of speculations whether the talk will be or not. We'll give you another example. At the time of visit of President Xi to Moscow, Prime Minister of Japan was here in Kyiv, a country which is presiding in the G7, and he was really ready and eager to talk not only about the military situation in Ukraine, but the further restoration of Ukraine. So the war is going on, unfortunately, and we need to involve as many countries as possible to help Ukraine to overcome this Russian aggression.
So what about China's proposals for negotiating an end to this war? Can China become a trusted mediator between your country and Russia?
If you mean the document which was announced several weeks ago, it's kind of, it's not a plan, it's kind of understanding of the situation, and it's not really good that the situation is described as conflict. It's not a conflict, it's a war. But again, some proposals in this document are coinciding. I mean, territorial integrity of the countries. That's what's important for Ukraine. Let's talk about restoring the territorial integrity of Ukraine, or fighting the nuclear terrorism or nuclear blackmailing. That's what is Russia doing against all the world. So let's talk. The only thing is to talk.
Okay. Now, last month, your President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said 2023 will be the year of our victory. Do you think that still stands?
That's absolutely still possible, provided that the speedy delivery of ammunition and artillery systems and battle tanks and fighter jets are taking place. That's absolutely possible because there's a will and courage and professionals on the armed forces. What we will need is the unity of Europe, of the entire world around Ukraine, in terms of weaponry, in terms of sanctions, in terms of European integration of Ukraine. You were talking today about the summit. It's very important to go in with the European path of Ukraine, with joining Ukraine to the EU. So if everything this is in place, we will definitely win.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. That was Ihor Zhaovkva, advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Lots of people are having to come to terms with the continuing loss of loved ones in this war, many of whose bodies still haven't been found. DW's Max Zender has been speaking with some of them.
A battleground turned place of mourning. Badri Lolashvili was among those who died defending the Kyiv suburbs, here in Moshun.
The monument is exactly in this trench. That's why I fenced it with wood. That's the first thing I did. It was here that my brother died.
Pavlo and his mother Larisa have created this memorial to remember him and others. However, finding out what happened was a painfully slow process. Pavlo received an SMS that his brother had died. No further details.
We searched for him for 2 months. We communicated with various services that might have some information. And we found him. Territorial Defense, which was located here, called. They found a bottle with a paper inside, written in Russian, that said, 2 Ukrainian soldiers are buried here.
Like them, other families often must search for missing loved ones themselves. Almost everywhere in Moshun, you come across silent witnesses of the war. People's homes and cars destroyed, lives lost. The battle for Kyiv ended almost a year ago, and in the chaos of war, many went missing. Those defending the city, as well as civilians, like those living in the occupied outskirts, and who authorities to this day are struggling to find.
People are returning from abroad, returning from the west of Ukraine, who have been absent for a long period of time since the occupation and are providing us with new information. Prisoners of war also testify, but mostly the security service of Ukraine works there. They also give information about where, how, and under what circumstances people were killed and buried.
But civilians like Pavlo and Larisa Lulashvili don't want to depend just on the authorities. They started an initiative to help find missing persons more easily. Today they meet with Anatoly Ostampenko, a parliament member in a Kyiv school. The air raid sirens just went off. He wants to see how the government can support them.
Thanks to Pavlo and his mother and everyone who works with them, we found our heroes who were missing. Now we know where they died.
56 people so far. But to improve the process, they want to create a centralized database where information from the military, government, and families is automatically pooled. A step forward, even if wartime security means not everything can be shared.
While there is a war, there is certain data that we cannot divulge. It won't work fully. We understand that when we win, the base will be more expanded, more disclosed, and relatives will be able to find their missing loved ones faster.
Every other week, Pavlo and Larisa come to the former fighting trenches. They say they can feel Badri's presence here, and they want to help others to have that too.
In the coming hours, EU leaders are set to endorse a plan to ramp up the supply of artillery shells to Kyiv. They're gathering for a summit in Brussels where United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres will also join. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy will address the meeting via video link. The summit agenda also covers migration and the economic impact of the war in Ukraine. So with the war in Ukraine high on the minds of EU leaders, let's get straight across to our correspondent, Rosie Burchard in Brussels. Rosie, the EU preparing to endorse a plan to send Ukraine 1 million rounds of ammunition within the next year. Is more military support likely to be on today's agenda?
Well, EU leaders here in this building will be giving Claire a resounding rubber stamp to this plan to jointly procure ammunition for Ukraine, something Kyiv says it needs and fast. We've heard from the Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. She is the woman who is behind this plan. She says she's delighted that it's been managed to be agreed within the space of 5 weeks, which of course is quite a long time on the battlefield, but in the timeline of European Union lawmaking, well, it's quite speedy. So she says she's delighted. When she was asked, will this be enough? She said, well, it depends how long this war lasts. And of course, we have had dire warnings, for example, from the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying European countries should prepare for the long haul here. EU nations say they will stay by Ukraine's side for as long as it takes. And this new plan is about delivering on that promise.
And we're also expecting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to address the summit via video link. What do you expect we might hear from him?
Claire, what I expect is what Zelenskyy often says when he addresses these leaders in Brussels, and that is one key word: speed. Speed on delivering weapons, speed on delivering on promises, and speed on sanctions. Remember, the European Union has already slapped 10 rounds of sanctions on Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. That includes, for example, an embargo on Russian coal and a ban on imports of most Russian oil. Kyiv would, of course, like to see the screws tightened further on Moscow's ability to keep financing its war. But from the Estonian Prime Minister, who I just mentioned, we've also heard that she would like an emphasis at these talks on preventing circumvention of sanctions. She says the priority should be closing loopholes in the existing restrictions.
Rosie, let's also talk for a moment about China and its support for Russia. Xi Jinping has just gone to Moscow, holding talks with Putin, calling him a dear friend. How concerned are EU leaders about what appear to be deepening ties there?
Well, China really is the elephant in the room at this meeting. It's not officially on the agenda, but of course I think we all know the diplomatic event of this week is not this summit, but it of course was those landmark talks between Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, looking at what does appear to be, as you said, deepening ties, we're having some degree of caution and concern from EU leaders. The Estonian Prime Minister brushed it off on her way into these talks. She said, I'm not concerned. On the other hand, we heard from Latvia's Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš, who said this should prompt the EU to reflect long and hard, deeply, on how it wants to approach relations with Beijing. He says the best way is a united approach, which we haven't so far seen from EU leaders. Sometimes China can be a controversial issue when it comes to foreign policy in this European Union. Now, let's not forget, Beijing says it wants peace and is working for peace. But of course, Brussels and Beijing have very different ideas on how to get there. China has criticised the European Union for sending arms to Ukraine. It says that it's sort of fueling the fire of this war, whereas on the European Union side, there's a much more of a degree of suspicion there because China has, despite saying it wants peace, it has not imposed sanctions on Moscow. And of course, it hasn't actually explicitly criticised Moscow for this full-scale invasion. On the contrary, we've seen in the past few days signs of deepening and quite friendly ties.
Thank you so much for that update. That's DW correspondent Rosie Burchard in Brussels.